In this screencast about Kiwi, we're going to look at how we can create an object that effectively makes a power down. So in here I've put an object that's a bug, and when the Kiwi collides with it, he has to move slower for a certain amount of time. So I'll just preview that first so you can see how it works, and then we'll look at the code behind it. So we have this new enemy object, it's a bug, and if you notice when the Kiwi's moving left and right, we have it going at about 4 pixels. Now if I collide with the bug, I've effectively now have a power down, and I can only move at 1 pixel, and if I try to jump, I can't really get over the trap. So I'm a bit stuck when I go into the power down. Now, if the power down mode never expired, I would never be able to get past that trap. So that would be really frustrating. So what we can do is set a timer, so you only have that power down for a certain amount of time. It's sort of like your penalty. It's like being sin-binned for a wee while. So when the timer runs out, you notice now I have my full range of movement back, and hopefully then I can get away and start playing the game. So we'll look at how you do that within the code. Now, first of all, I have created just a sprite called the evil bug sprite and its related object. The images for these are all in the Kiwi folder. So now I just have an object, sprite, evil bug, and I can place that into my room. But the important thing is what happens when we collide with it. What type of programming do we need? So if we go into our Kiwi object, the first thing that I've added a create event, and when we create the Kiwi, we actually have to set some sort of a variable. So in the control, we have our variables, and this is going to be a test variable because we have to know, are we in power down mode or not in power down mode? And that's going to determine whether the Kiwi can move quickly or at its normal pace, or it's in power down mode, meaning it has to move slowly. But initially, we need to somehow initialize that variable or create it and give it some sort of an initial value. And when we start, we're not in power down mode. So I've just created a variable called power down. You could call it anything you want, as long as it's properly named and it's sensible. And I've set the value to false. You could also use a 0 and a 1 if you wanted to, like on and off, but I've said it's in false mode. We're not in power down mode by default when we are created. So when the Kiwi's created, he's not in power down mode. The next thing is looking at creating a collision event. So I've created a collision event with the bug. So what happens upon collision? And we know that there are events and actions. So logically, we want to set the variable. So we're using the variable, set variable. And which variable do we want to set? The power down one. And upon collision, that becomes true. So we're in power down mode. I also, on the collision, I want it to play a squawk. So just indicating, oh, I've run into something bad. And I have set an alarm to go off. Now, we'll look at the alarm in a minute, but if we were to be in power down mode for the rest of the game, then that wouldn't be very fun. You know, people would be frustrated and give up. So usually when you have a power down or a power up, it's for a certain amount of time. You get to use that, or a certain amount of time that it affects you. So I've just randomly chosen about 300 steps. I thought that was long enough to be in penalized and in power down mode. So what we're going to do, on the other hand of that is we're going to say when the alarm goes off, set, so use that, set the power down back to false. So look at that together, all together. When we create the Kiwi, we've started set a new variable called power down, and we're saying he's in false power down mode. He's not in power down mode. Then, whenever we collide with the bug, we set the power down variable to true. It goes into power down mode. We have it play the sound to squawk. We set the alarm so that eventually he'll get out of power down mode. And the other thing I've added in here is to destroy the instance of other, meaning when the Kiwi collides with the bug, destroy the instance of the bug so that it's not sitting there to collide with again. And the difference, I might just point this out because I know there's been some confusion, but if you said object and you picked another object to destroy, that actually destroys the whole object, and here we're just destroying the other thing we're colliding with. Or here we could destroy for some other reason a whole other object. So that's just something to think about if you wanted to destroy a whole different object. Now, the last thing that we need to do is we need to make this have some sort of an effect on the Kiwi. Well, you know that pressing the left and right arrow keys are what makes the Kiwi move. So normally, with the code that we already have, is when we press the left, we are going to turn in the Kiwi, the left sprite. We're going to check if the X position behind us or at -4 relative is collision free to see if we can move at all. But now we've got this power down to check for. So we need to say if our power down is false, we can move about 4 pixels at a time. Otherwise, or else, we can only move 1 pixel at a time. So we need a test variable. So we drag out our test variable and we check which variable are we testing. We're seeing if power down is false. So we will test that. If it is, we can jump to position -4 on the X relative or behind us by 4, else we can only go 1 at a time relative to where we are. And we do the same thing for the right. So if power down is false, we're not in power down mode, then we can go on the X 4 at a time. Otherwise, or else, so I just pulled out an else here, we can only go 1 at a time. So we're in that mode until, remember, the alarm goes off, and then when we collide with the bug, it turns it into power down mode being true, and when the alarm goes off, it'll set it back to false, and that way we're not in that mode forever. So I'll go through that one more time. Okay, now that we have our power down, we'll just go through that for power up. So I've created a sprite that's a gem sprite, and that's going to be our power up, and also an object, gem object for that, so it has the gem sprite. Now what do we need to happen? First of all, if we go into the Kiwi, when we create it, we'll also create another variable, and that variable will be the power up. On creation, it's set to false. We're not in power up mode to begin, so we add another one there. We also want another alarm event, and this one we can have, we'll create another alarm, alarm 2, and when alarm 2 goes off, we want power up to be false so that we're not in power up mode forever. Now, what happens when we collide with that object gem? Well, this time we'll set our variable power up to true. We'll play the sound power up, and I just made a sound called power up, and it's there's a file for that in the Dropbox. Then when we'll set alarm number 2 to go off in 500 steps, making it a little bit longer than the power down, so you get more advantage when you get a power up, or a longer time of advantage. And then we'll destroy the instance of the power up gem. That way you can't just continuously collide with it and get more and more and more power ups. So now the important thing is, what should happen when we collide with the gem? What actually do we want to happen if we get power up mode? Well, if we look at if we think about when we collide with the trap, right now, normally it just plays the sound squawk, sleeps for 1,000 milliseconds and destroys it, and the lives go down, and we have to restart. Well, we can test, however, and we're going to only have that happen if power up is equal to false. So if we use our test variable and we drag that out, and then we put some code blocks around that, start and ending of a block, we can say only have those things happen if power up is false, meaning we're not in power up mode. If we are in power up mode, then we've got immunity, and we can run into whatever we want, and we won't get destroyed. So to test that, let's go into our room, and we'll place a gem object. Oops. Get the gem object. So we'll put a gem object up maybe a little bit lower. And when we collide with that, we should have immunity from our next collision with our enemy. Now, one other thing, if you noticed, I just put that when we collided with the object trap, and that's because the trap is the parent, and then that should apply to anything that's a child of that, such as the dog or the stoat. So we'll see if our immunity works. Try to avoid the bug. Oh no, I'm in power down mode. I have to wait a bit to get out of my power down mode so I can get over. Now I can not very good at Kiwi pie. Get out of power down mode again, see if I can get up to my gem. Oh my, I might run out of recording time before I can actually play the game. I'm sure this is going to work if I can actually play. It's quite funny. Yes, and I have up here. So now it played it. I'm in my power up mode temporarily, and let's see what happens when I collide with one of my enemies. See that the dog, nothing happens to me until I was out of immunity time. So that's how we can make power ups and power downs.